I got one guy that always stands out to me when I think about this, who he had a lot of trauma from growing up in a home with an abusive alcoholic father.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so he was very emotionally dissociated. He could tell me just kind of plainly how his dad was abusive, but there'd like be no emotion to it.
Hmm.
But then later, like something with his roommate would bother him, and all the anger would come up. And so as we started to work through those issues, work through the process of forgiveness and healing, then you start to see the change. And he would tell me, it's
Mm.
like, when I'm meeting my needs in healthy ways, the SSA doesn't have a pull.
Oh, wow.
For other guys, it was simply just the big breakthrough for them was just having a space finally where they could share honestly and openly. I had one guy in the group. He was an older student. He was in his 30s when he was a student there, and he was molested as a kid, and he carried with him all his years the guilt of that, and he
Hmm.
literally believed that he seduced his abuser.
Oh, wow.
That's
Goodness.
the lie that he was convinced of. And so that's
I've
loaded
seen
with
that a
other
lot.
lies.
And I've seen that a lot. When
Oh yeah.
Paul and I watch a lot of documentaries about abuse that happens in churches, and there's a lot of underage people who are in relationships with adults, and of course it's inappropriate. And then the underage person feels somehow culpable for what's going on, and they
Oh yeah.
feel compelled to keep it quiet and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few dynamics at play that make that reality. Is like kids, the younger you are, the more you believe you're responsible for things that happen in your life, in
Hmm.
your world. So that's why it's important. Like when you parents divorce, counselors always tell parents to make a point to explain it's not your fault, because kids are just naturally egotistical,
Yeah.
or egocentric in some way. So they at least think that things are about them, even if they're not.
Yeah.
But then on top of
Egocentric is,
it,
yeah. Egoic. Yep.
molestation, it's just already molestation tells you that you wanted this. The abuser will even tell them you wanted this. This is what love is. All this stuff.
So,
So
I may be throwing you off course, but I've always wondered this. Is there a, and I don't know if you know this. I don't know if there's a statistic on this. Is there a statistic for those who experienced some kind of sexual trauma while they were underage correlated with those who struggle with
oh yeah,
attraction or inordinate attraction of any kind when they become adults?
yeah, yeah. I don't have the exact stat on me, but we're looking at 30 to 40% of men, uh, lesbians. About 85% have been sexually molested by a male.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's a huge correlation there. Now, um, that doesn't account for every case. So
Right,
when you
right,
understand more about the developmental model, you understand that there are explanations for the exceptions. But you
right.
do
So when you say the developmental model, you're talking about like Piaget and things like that?
mostly referring to, if you're familiar with Joseph Nicolosi, he's the founder of authentic reparative therapy.
Mm-mm.
Um, and he used Elizabeth Moberly's theories on the reparative drive theory. That, in general, what you see is that homosexuality, or at least the same sex attraction, is reparative in its function. That what drives a person towards seeking or to eroticize someone of the same sex is to
Mhm.
repair unmet attachment needs within themselves.
Oh, wow.
And
I'm
so
taking
when
notes.
you're
This is gonna be on YouTube, but I still feel like I need to take notes.
sure. Now, I want to backtrack real quick before I go any further, because I was telling a story about the school, and I just want to make a point that about a year into me leading the group that I was running, uh, the head of the student life department changed. And so from that point forward, I've only ever had support from the school. So at first I had a lot of opposition from them, but then it
Okay,
changed. So I just
okay,
want to make that clear that the school
okay,
did
good,
become very
yeah.
supportive of
I
the
think
work
I
I did.
derailed you with some of my questions.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's go back to, say, what we call with the reparative drive theory. Now, the basic idea is you have to understand what is necessary for development, especially when it comes to sexual development and gender identity development. It starts with attachment with mom.
Yep.
Attachment with mom gives you your first basic sense of who you are as an individual and that you are worthy of love.
Mm-hmm.
And that others, or at least someone close to you, can be trusted to love you and provide good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Provide your basic needs. And so when a mom is properly attuned and attached and attentive, that sets the child up for a good, secure identity so that I'm good, and therefore, and also others are good, and therefore I also have something good to offer others.
Mm-hmm.
Boys, between the ages of 3 to 5, they have another developmental task that girls don't have, and that is their gender identity development or their gender identity achievement. And that's where they have to separate to some degree from mom and bond with dad.
Wow.
And so dad has to be very active in a young boy's life when he's a toddler and in the play age.
Mm-hmm.
And so dad becomes his gateway into the world of men.
Mm-hmm.
So that he's a model for what it means that he is not mom. He is not the same sex as her. He's different from her. I'm going to grow up to be like dad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing. For a boy to want to become like dad, to emulate dad, he needs to perceive the father as two things. He needs to be a salient father. And to be salient, he needs to have two qualities. He needs to be perceived as strong
Mm-hmm.
and benevolent. So he's
Mm.
powerful, but he uses power for good. And so when you have a father who's, well, one, just either not
So he can't be
absent.
strong and tyrannical.
Exactly. Strong and but also not strong and passive. I'm working with a client right now who his dad was very effeminate, and he didn't have a model for masculinity. And so this guy ended up developing transgender identification for a period, and then same-sex attraction. And he was never affirmed in his masculinity, definitely not by his dad, because his dad wasn't secure in his own masculinity.
So it's sounding to me like having two parents is crucially important for development.
Definitely, of course. Yeah, I mean, it should be.
Well, I mean, it's obvious. It seems obvious, but so I think there's something happening in the culture right now where people are asking the question. So what I'm trying to do is like maybe steel man some of the gender stuff. Steel man some of the stuff that would go against typical Christianity and say what is really going on here. And it seems to me that society in general is questioning how much of our culture is by nature, like how much of the way that we be as a culture, male and female, and our roles and that sort of thing, how much of that is natural and basically immutable or instinctive, maybe is a better word for it, and how much of it is purely arbitrarily enculturated and could be another way if we wanted it to be another way. I think that's a fair question to ask. I don't necessarily, I don't know that people know that that's the question they're asking. Does that make sense? I think it's a fair question to ask. I don't agree with all the answers that are coming out, but I do think it's a fair question to ask. I mean, when it comes down to like gender roles and things like, I'm married. My wife is completely feminine. I'm completely masculine, but sometimes she likes to mow the yard and I like to do the dishes. You know, we don't have, typical gender roles don't really matter to us. We just do what we want to do, what we feel like doing, and what we agree to because we're the ones that have to live with each other.
Yeah.
So I think people are trying to suss out the arbitrariness from society and figure out how much of that is arbitrary. And just like a kid trying to see how much of the rules that their parents made, how much can they break them and get away with it? Where is my boundary really? It's almost like society is toying with this. And of course, there's many instances where we're going way over the line, but it seems like they're just asking this question: how arbitrary is our society? How arbitrary are our
fair
cultures
question.
and traditions? Yeah.
For sure. This is one of the areas where I'm very critical of the church, at least in America, because I grew up when I was in elementary school, going to a particular church where we worship God and football.
Yeah.
And you were really, really damned if you didn't worship football. Like, you just could
I
not relate
saw
to
a
other
truck.
boys.
I saw a truck. I don't even know if I can say this out loud. It was a pickup truck, and it said something about Jesus, beer, girls, and football, or something like that.
And so we have a really reductionistic idea of what masculinity is, at least in America. And so I would say the woke activist types, they have a little bit of a point when they're trying to challenge these stereotypes, what it means to be masculine.
Right.
And we
I
don't do
think there
ourselves
is
any.
some signal in there. I think
Yeah,
the conclusions are crazy, but I think there is some signal in the questioning.
exactly. We don't do ourselves any favor when all we do is double down on the historic stereotypes of
Mhm.
masculinity.
Mhm.
What we need to do is return to more classic, an appreciation for the multiple archetypes of masculinity.
Hmm.
There's the warrior archetype. That's one we honor the most, right? But there's also the gardener archetype, the philosopher poet archetype, the
Mhm.
artist archetype
Mhm.
of being masculine, the husband archetype of what it means to really care for others, to be
Mhm.
tender and nurturing. There's all these other historic ideas of what it means to be masculine that we don't give their proper place.
Mhm.
And so when you have a boy who maybe through development, but probably mostly through temperament, just doesn't quite fit in to the uh, stereotypes of masculinity,
Mhm.
and the dad doesn't know how to relate to him
Mm.
and doesn't affirm his masculinity just in the very unique way that he is, then that creates a gender insecurity. Might
Mhm.
not lead to, say, transgender identification, but at least a sense that I'm not man enough. I can't tell
Mm.
you how much that's at least 3/4 of my clients, they fit this type. There's different subtypes of same-sex attraction. The majority are those who have a sense that they're not masculine enough.
Mhm.
It gets compounded when they also have, say, older brothers or who put them down, who bully them, when they have peers who don't relate to them well, who they're already on the outside of others, outside of just the relationship with their dad. So it's not always just dad's fault not affirming them, but like you can have a guy who had a good enough relationship with dad, but he still was bullied enough by other boys. He was ostracized. Like, to develop secure enough masculinity is a bit of a community effort. It
Mm.
really helps to have multiple streams supporting you in your masculine identification.
That makes a lot of sense.
So the idea is that normally, or at least normative sexual development, is that you so identify with your own sex that by the time puberty hits, what you most desire is what becomes eroticized.
Mhm.
All right. So if we understand it this way, that sexual attraction is all about seeing the other as a good for you.
Mhm.
When I'm secure enough in my masculinity and I see that I am a gift, God created us to be a gift,
Yeah.
then I'm going to want to give my gift to the one that is least like me,
There we go. Yeah.
the
So
other
it's
sex.
complementary. I hate
That's
not.
the
I'm not
compliment.
trying to say complementarianism. I'm
But
just
this is true complementarian. We
yeah.
have the wrong idea of complementarianism
Right.
in most of our evangelical churches.
Mhm.
It's very chauvinistic,
Right. Right.
the stereotype that we see of complementarianism. True complementarianism is about seeing the beauty in the other.
Mhm.
And so when you see other as different, now you also need to see the other as different and good in herself.
Mhm.
When you have those components where you have an embodied sense of your own goodness and identification as a male, for example, and then you have an embodied sense of the other as good and as different from you, then that's where you see the greatest difference and greatest deficit of, oh, this is what I need. This goes back to Adam. God recognized that it's not good for Adam to be alone.
Mhm.
So there was a deficit. So one of the things I explain to my clients is, or really they just discovered on their own, and then I sort of say this and it helps confirm it for them, is the greater the deficit, the greater the desire.
Oh, interesting.
So
So are we saying? Am I hearing? I think I'm hearing that same-sex attraction might come from a recognition or a subconscious recognition of a deficit of masculinity in a male.
Correct. The sexual urge will always go where the greatest desire is.
Wow.
And where the greatest deficit is, that's where the greatest desire will be.
Yeah.
So the true image of God, if you actually understand, go into more the Imago Dei, what it means to be made in the image of God.
Image of
It's
God,
not arbitrary that the scripture says, in the beginning, he made them male and female. In the image of God, he made them. That it places our design as male and female right there when mentioning the image of God.
Yeah, right there, Genesis 1:26 and 27.
Not arbitrary, because it's showing that intrinsic to our being made in God's image is that we're male and female and called to become one flesh.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that Pope John Paul II would teach about in his Theology of the Body. So I'm a big student of his. And so it reflects God's own communal nature as a Trinity. And so we're made to be relational in nature. So the image of God is actually male and female together. It's not just, individually I am made in God's image, but the full representation of that is in the male and female together.